It's just after 9:30 at night. Dorothy Jane Scott walks out of the hospital and into the parking lot. Earlier that evening, she'd driven a coworker there, a man named Conrad Bostrom, after he was bitten by a black widow spider. Inside, Conrad and another coworker, Pam Hurd, are still waiting in line at the pharmacy. Dorothy steps out to get the car so Conrad doesn't have to walk. It's simple, routine, the kind of decision that you don't think twice about. She's coming right back. But within minutes, something changes. Pam Hurd looks up and sees a car speeding through the parking lot. Headlights on high, bright enough to obscure who's ever behind the wheel. A white, light-colored station wagon, moving fast enough to stand out. It looks like Dorothy's car, but Pam can't say for certain, only that it matches. And from that moment on, no one sees Dorothy again. That's the last moment anyone can point to, the last movement, the last possibility. Not long after that, her car is found, burning in an alley, engulfed in flames. No Dorothy, no explanation, just a vehicle on fire and a woman who vanished. And when investigators start looking into her life, they uncover something else. For weeks before that night, Dorothy had been getting phone calls from a man who told her that he was going to kill her. Welcome back, listeners, to Dark Dialogue, the podcast where we unravel the shadows of the human mind and dive deep into the mysteries that haunt small towns and big cities alike. I'm your host, John. Now, before we get into tonight's case, I want to take a quick second to address something. Angela isn't with me on this episode. Her schedule just didn't line up for recording this week, but we didn't want to leave you without an episode. Now, this case matters, and getting these stories out consistently matters to us. So tonight, you're stuck with just me. And we're still going to do this the same way that we always do, focused, thorough, and centered on the victim. Now, tonight, we're looking at the disappearance of Dorothy Jane Scott, a case that starts in a hospital parking lot and quickly turns into something far more disturbing. Because what happened to Dorothy that night was not random. It didn't come out of nowhere. Weeks before she ever walked into that parking garage, something had already started. So let's get to know Dorothy Jane Scott. Dorothy Jane Scott was 32 years old, and she lived in Anaheim, California. She's the mother to a young son who is approximately 4 years old at this time, and she lived with her family. She lived with an aunt. She worked as a secretary or a bookkeeper for a couple of different businesses. Dorothy is described as being a quiet person, reliable. She's also deeply religious. With her young son, she had people depending on her, so she had reasons to be a steady kind of person, and that's exactly how she's described. She's very responsible. She's very hardworking. Like I said, she's very religious, and she's very devoted to her son. So the idea that she would disappear of her own accord just doesn't fit with who Dorothy is. She's very routine driven, and she does not live any kind of a high risk kind of lifestyle. She's not transient or unstable. She is grounded in the Anaheim area. So there's absolutely nothing in her life that would point to a voluntary disappearance. And there's nothing that suggests that she has any kind of what you would consider high risk exposure. But something had changed. In the weeks, possibly the months leading up to that night, she started getting these strange phone calls. And we have to set the timeline a little bit here because this is in the 80s. So this is at a period of time where we did not have cell phones. This is at a period of time where you could have unlisted numbers. And she's getting these calls at home, and it doesn't seem to matter what she does. The calls don't stop. Now, unfortunately, because it is the 80s, along with not having cell phones, we lacked a lot of other technology, and there really was no easy way for a person to record phone calls the way that there is now. There's a myriad of different ways now that you can record a phone call, but back in the 80s when we had only landlines, it was much more difficult to record them. So We have no recordings of these calls, but we do have her descriptions of at least some of them. We could safely say that it was a repeated harassment. It occurred over and over and over again. It was a male caller, and he had a voice that Dorothy felt she recognized, but she couldn't place it. It was a voice that she believed that she'd heard before, but she didn't know where. And it was the same voice every time. And it followed the typical psychopath stalker kind of progression where he would go from, I love you, I want to be with you, I want to spend the rest of my life with you, blah, 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 to I'm going to kill you, you're going to die, all that kind of nonsense. So they escalated over time, and they seemed to oscillate back and forth just like a freaking psychopath. And the caller displayed an eerie personal knowledge of Dorothy, where she would go, what she would do, what she was wearing, all kinds of personal details that somebody had to have been watching her in order to be able to have these details. And we don't have any kind of a detailed phone log, and we don't know how many of these calls there were, just that they were repeated and consistent. But there's no day-to-day record of she had a call every day or she got a call on every Monday. We just don't know. We just know that she complained to friends and family about these calls. She was concerned. She was frightened. And they repeated for likely a series of months before she ended up going missing. Other than that, what we can say with confidence is that they were reported consistently. There was a definite escalation pattern where they went from I love you, I want to be with you, to I'm going to kill you in more threatening tones. And so they're key events. Now, the best that we can reconstruct is that the calls begin sometime around October of 1979, which would have been roughly 7 months before her disappearance. And the calls would come into her work locations and also to her aunt's house. Like I said, in this October period of time, they are more affectionate, and then they would begin to alternate. We know that claims were made during these calls, such as, I love you, and we were meant to be together. And it demonstrated a knowledge of her movements and her clothing. So this is already targeted. It's not just some kind of random harassment. It's not what you would call prank phone calls. He was able to describe events that somebody would have had to have been there in order to be able to describe. So we can safely say that he isn't just calling her, he's actually watching her because of what he's describing. He's not guessing at things. He has a very specific knowledge. And so that is what changes this from a nuisance into obvious surveillance. And then the calls escalate as we move into early 1980. The tones begin to shift more aggressively, but there's still this weird mixed messaging. He would have a I love you right alongside threats of I'm going to kill you, I'm going to cut you up into pieces, and strange shit like that. One key incident is when the caller tells her to go outside. And when she did, she discovers that somebody had left a dead rose on her car. Now, the implication of this is obvious that there is now a confirmed physical proximity. This freaking psychopath stalker has now been to her home. So if there was any doubt that he didn't know where she lived, that doubt is now gone. It's obvious that he does, and he knows exactly where she lived. He can access the area. He has accessed the area. This is no longer just phone-based. And then there's also another implication of the dead rose, which has been linked to death threats, especially through the mafia. There are several stories of somebody receiving a dead rose as an indication that they are going to die. So the fact that the dead rose is left can also be taken as a direct threat on her life. Now, Dorothy's reaction to this is she tells her mother that the voice sounds familiar, but she cannot identify it. Obviously, the poor woman is scared to death. She's afraid for her life. She's afraid for her son's life. She begins taking karate classes and discussing purchasing a handgun. Now, from the Dead Rose event, we know that the shift is now changed from he's making contact with her to he's actually present there. And he wants her to know that he can reach her at any time that he wants to. And then the calls enter phase 3, which is the final escalation. And this occurs just weeks before the disappearance. The calls become very aggressively and explicitly life-threatening. There's no confirmed frequency of this time, so I can't possibly guess. I have no idea how frequent the calls were coming in. But what we do know is one direct quote that he said, which was, "When I get you alone, I will cut you up into bits so no one will ever find you." So it's not just vague anymore. It's very specific. It's no longer an obsession. This is his intent being communicated to her. And so that's where this changes how we look at that night, because when Dorothy walks out into that parking lot, this is not the first sign that something's wrong. She's already been living with this for months. Now, as I said earlier, Dorothy works as a secretary and a bookkeeper for 2 connected businesses, Swinger's Psych Shop and Custom John's Head Shop, both in Anaheim. And they sold psychedelic items and head shop merchandise, those cheesy freaking velvet pictures that were so popular back in the 80s and lava lamps and, stuff like that. But Dorothy was in the back office only. She very rarely interacted with customers. So she was not part of the public-facing environment. She's working there, but not really part of that scene. So this is really a job and family connection. It is not her lifestyle. Dorothy was described as a hippie, but she was also described as deeply religious. So really no drug or alcohol ties to Dorothy whatsoever. Now, like I said, she lived with her aunt and she had a 4-year-old son who she had custody of and was living with her. Her parents lived very nearby in Anaheim as well. And one thing about Dorothy that I do think is important is pretty much everything in her life that I was able to map happens in roughly a 5-mile radius. So she really had a very small radius of activity. She very rarely left that roughly 5-mile radius. And everything in this entire story happens in about a 12-mile radius. So all of this is happening very close. You can almost say she never really left her neighborhood in Anaheim. And when I say never, I mean as a general rule. She didn't go 15 miles away to do shopping and stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure she traveled throughout the Anaheim area, but her day-to-day movements really remained restricted to roughly that 4 or 5 mile radius. Now, her father is connected to the businesses in some way, and I wasn't able to clarify exactly how. It seems like he was possibly a part owner in the businesses, and he also did the maintenance work for the businesses. So that is both Swinger's Psych Shop and Custom John's Head Shop. Now, it's a pretty tight family loop, and Dorothy maintains a very predictable routine. She goes to work, she goes home, and she spends time with her family. And that's pretty much it. Her world is pretty well contained. She's not somebody who's moving around socially, and she's not exposed to a wide network of people. So it really narrows the potential exposure that she would have to this friggin' psycho. Now, like I said, we do know that the calls came both to her workplaces and to her residence. The caller seemed to know her work schedule. He knew when she was at work. And this is important when we look at the fact that Dorothy was primarily in the back office. So it's not like it could be somebody necessarily that would just come in and see her working there. They had to have been surveilling her. They had to know at least what her vehicle looked like so that they could determine that she was at work. So I think that we can definitely infer that The caller has a familiarity with her routine, with her environment, and the workplace is the primary contact point. So whoever did this knows where she works and knows when she's going to be there. It's very targeted and it's obviously not random. So all of this leads into May 28th, 1980. Now that evening, there's a staff meeting at Swinger's Psych Shop, and it's scheduled for roughly 9 o'clock in the evening. The staff meeting is for both of the shops because they are both connected through their ownership. And Dorothy obviously attends the meeting, and she has Sean, her 4-year-old son, with her. So it's a normal routine. Nothing is out of place. But at that meeting, she notices her coworker, Conrad Bostron, seems to be very ill. He's fidgeting. He's uncomfortable. Looks like he's possibly running a fever. He's visibly unwell. And when she goes and talks to him, he shows her this mark that he has on his arm, which would later be identified as a black widow bite. Dorothy, being the loving, caring, supporting person that she was, decides that Conrad needs to go to the hospital because while she may not know that this is a black widow bite, she definitely can tell that Conrad is sick. So she gets her friend, Pam Head, who also works at the business, to go with her to take Conrad to the hospital. So they leave the meeting together. It's just coworkers helping out coworkers. There's absolutely nothing that would indicate that there was any sort of romantic involvement between Conrad and Dorothy or Conrad and Pam Head for that matter. And there's no indication of any kind of danger. It's just a practical decision. Conrad is obviously ill and Dorothy wants to make sure that he gets taken care of. Now, on the way to UCI Medical Center, Dorothy stops by her parents' house to drop Sean off so that he doesn't have to go to the hospital with him. Her parents are going to watch Sean while she goes and takes care of her friend and coworker. And at that time, her mother convinces her to change her scarf, which is going to become very important later. So Dorothy was wearing a black scarf. That is absolutely uncontested. She was wearing a black scarf to the staff meeting at Swinger's Psych Shop. Now, what is reported differently is she either, and this is the most common description, and this is what I believe, is she changed from the black scarf to a warmer red scarf. Other places will report this as a white scarf. She changed from a black scarf to a white scarf. It doesn't really matter what the color was, but it is just conflicting reports. But by far the most common is she put on a red scarf. Now that red scarf is going to become important and we'll get to it. But the important part right now is there's a documented change in her clothing just before she goes to the hospital. And it's one of the last known details before she disappears. So from there, they continue to UC Irvine Medical Center, and that's where the timeline really starts to tighten. So they arrive at UC Irvine Medical Center. And again, this is all very close. UC Irvine is within that 4 to 5 mile radius that I talked about earlier. So very close. It didn't take them very long. And they arrived there in the late evening, sometime roughly just before 10 p.m. Conrad is triaged and he's taken into the back, just like we all know what happens when you go to the emergency department. They take him into the back. They start treating him for his black widow bite. And Pam and Dorothy are left out in the waiting room, just waiting for Conrad to finish up. So at this point, they're just waiting. There's absolutely nothing unusual. It's a very standard ER visit. Dorothy and Pam sit together in the waiting area and they read magazines. They watch a little bit of TV. And Pam would describe it as being a few hours. And she also would say something that's very important, and that is that Dorothy was never out of her sight during this entire period of time. They were together the whole time. And that's described as an absolute. They weren't even apart for a few minutes. They were sitting side by side the entire time. So Dorothy received no phone calls. She made no phone calls. She didn't step away. There's absolutely no unexplained gaps in the timeline at all during this period, which matters because it really limits what could have possibly happened here. If someone is contacting her, tracking her, or planning something, it's not happening inside that waiting room because she's not alone. So if someone knows where she is, it's not because she told them. She made no phone calls. She didn't contact anyone. And this really extends all the way back to the discovery at the staff meeting of Conrad being ill. Really, from that moment on, she has somebody with her all the time. So she never let anybody know that she was headed to the hospital. So the question becomes, how would somebody know that she's there? Now, Conrad is discharged from the hospital at roughly 11 o'clock p.m. He's given a prescription, an antibiotic or whatever. He's weak. He's obviously still sick. He's not feeling well. And now they're getting ready to leave. So Dorothy offers to go get the car and bring it up to the door so that Conrad doesn't have to walk through the parking garage, and very practical, normal behavior. Dorothy tells Pam that she's going to go get the car. Pam stays with Conrad, and they go to the pharmacy, which is located right inside the hospital building, to get Conrad's prescription filled. Dorothy briefly uses the restroom, and then she exits out towards the parking garage. So this is really the first separation window. This is the first time that she has been out of Pam's sight since the staff meeting. And it's a very limited window. She goes to the restroom and she walks out to the parking garage. That's it. It's very brief. So from the time they arrive to the moment that she walks out of that hospital, there's no gap. There's no window where she disappears. There's no window where she makes contact with anyone, which means if someone is waiting for her, they had to already know that she was there. They almost had to have followed her from the meeting earlier. Before we keep going, I want to take a quick second. If you've been listening to Dark Dialogue, you already know that this isn't just storytelling. Every episode is built around one goal: keeping the focus on the victim and working towards the truth. So if that matters to you, make sure that you're following the show on whatever platform you're listening on. And if you haven't yet, take a second to leave a rating or a review. It makes a bigger difference than people realize. And it's what helps these cases reach people who otherwise wouldn't even hear them. All right, so let's get back to the story. So Pam and Conrad go to the pharmacy. They stand in line. They get Conrad's prescription, and then they go to the entrance of the hospital, and Dorothy's not there. She doesn't return. And so obviously concern builds after several minutes. They know something's off, but there's no immediate panic. It's also not normal. So they go to look for her. They walk into the parking lot. There's no Dorothy on foot. There's no obvious disturbances visible at all. And then a white Toyota station wagon approaches speeding out. It has its headlights on and the high beams are on, and Pam describes them as blinding. She's unable to see who is driving. They try to flag the car down, but the car does not stop. It actually accelerates past them, makes a sharp right turn, and exits the lot. So the lights are too bright for them to see who is driving. The driver is completely obscured, and the car doesn't stop. It just takes off. Now, we can't say for sure that that is her car, but what we can say is that it matches the description of her car. It's a light-colored station wagon, Toyota, just like Dorothy drove. But they cannot be positive that it's hers, and again, they cannot confirm who was driving it. So they assume that there was possibly an emergency that involved her son. They do not immediately jump to the assumption that this is some kind of an abduction, that this is foul play. They assume something happened. Now, Again, this is 1980, so I'm not entirely sure how they thought she was notified of this. There's no cell phones. I'm guessing maybe they thought her father or something came and caught her in the parking lot to tell her. I don't know the mindset. I just know that Pam explained that they thought something possibly happened with her son and she sped away. It's a logical reaction. It's a logical thought process. They obviously don't think that this is any kind of an abduction yet. They're just trying to make sense of what just happened. So they go back to the hospital and they wait for sometime between like 1 and 2 hours. And then they notify the hospital security and they call Dorothy's parents and they find out that she never arrived at the parents' house and she never came back to the hospital. So at that point, it stops being confusion and it starts becoming something else entirely. Now, at her parking space where the car was located, they find an empty Marlboro cigarette pack and a small box of tissues, Kleenexes. Now, Dorothy's not a smoker. Like I explained earlier, she's highly religious and she does not drink or smoke. I couldn't find any public record of any sort of testing that was done on these evidence items, whether there was fingerprints taken or any kind of evidence processing, but we can say with almost 100% certainty that those cigarettes were not hers, which raises a possibility, obviously, of another person being present, but we don't know who they belong to. They're also located in a parking garage, so it could be relevant to this crime, and it could be completely unrelated. We just don't know. There's no reports of any kind of blood found. There's no signs of a struggle other than those dropped belongings. And there's no witness reports of any kind of disturbance. So there's nothing that really shows a fight other than a couple of dropped items. So here's what we actually have. We have a very short window with no confirmed struggle, a car that speeds out of the parking lot at high speed with an unknown driver, and very minimal physical traces. And that's it. That's all we know, at least about what happened inside that parking garage. So all of this is occurring roughly 11 o'clock, probably by the time investigators arrive on scene and all of that kind of stuff, we're into midnight. And so we're into the early morning hours now of May 29th. And roughly 4:30 to 5 o'clock that morning in Santa Ana, in an alley in the 800 block of South Townsend, which is roughly like 5 miles or so from the hospital, there's a report of smoke and fire in that alley. And when responders get there, they find Dorothy's white 1973 Toyota station wagon, and it is actively burning. So hours after the abduction, the car shows up back relatively near the hospital. Now, the car is engulfed in flames when it's found. Firefighters obviously extinguish the fire, and investigators would find that the interior is heavily destroyed. The exterior, and especially the front of the car, is more intact, but no Dorothy is found at the scene. There's no body there. It's strictly her car, and she's not in it. And there's no sign of her. No indication that she was ever there. Now, the arson investigation found that accelerant was used and it was poured all over the passenger side. There's a gas can that was found in the trunk of the car. So obviously, this fire is not accidental. It's intentional. It's not a breakdown. It's not an accident. This is deliberate destruction. Now, the car is also found with its headlights on and the driver's door open, which to me suggests a rapid exit. Whoever was driving wanted to leave quickly. At least that's what the evidence suggests to me. It's not staged carefully. It's not controlled. This is rapid. What's not at the fire scene, again, is no body, no blood, no confirmed biological evidence, and there's no record of any kind of usable prints or anything forensically recovered from the fire scene. So again, There's nothing that tells us what actually happened. The car tells us what someone did after the fact, but not what they did with Dorothy. Now, the initial handling of the case was handled by the Santa Ana Police Department, and it's unclear the status of the vehicle. It's unclear what happened to it. It's unclear if there's any sort of testing that has occurred on it. And I mean after the fact. So between 1980 and 2026, it's unclear whether the vehicle is still in police custody and has been subjected to any kind of modern retesting, or if it was destroyed. I just couldn't find that information. So in theory, at least, the car could still have some answers if it still exists in police custody and could still be tested. There is a possibility there, but I don't know the condition of that car. But I do know that whoever did this was inside of that vehicle. But now, obviously, after the fire, this case changes. It's not just a disappearance. It's obviously a controlled removal that's followed by arson to cover up evidence. So the question becomes, what happened in that gap from the time that the car speeds out of the parking lot to the time that it's found burning not far from the hospital? And that's the part that we don't see. And then there's something else here that just doesn't sit right with me. Because when you actually map this out, it isn't simple. Her movements go from her work at Swinger's Psych Shop to her parents' house to the hospital, and then the car ends up some miles away, and the fire is set hours later. So this is multiple locations and kind of spread out. It's not happening all in one place. There is definite movement here, and a lot of movement. Whoever did this, whoever is responsible, has to take her from the hospital. They have to move her somewhere else. They take her car, they burn it, and then they leave the scene of the fire. So it's not just one action. It is a lot to manage. And at least the way that I look at this, it creates a problem that I've been trying to reconcile, because this is not walkable. You are definitely dealing with vehicles. So either the attacker has a car or he doesn't. Now, if he has his own car, now he has to manage two vehicles, which obviously complicates things. If he doesn't have his own car, then following her, controlling her, moving her, all becomes very difficult. So you're left with possibilities, at least in my mind, that there's a second vehicle, possibly another person, or something like a cab. But we don't have any evidence for those. And this is where behavior starts to become very important, because when you look at long-term stalking cases, especially those that turn violent, they are overwhelmingly single offender cases. This usually is not something that two people do together. These are typically very personal crimes. They focus on control, fixation, ownership of the victim. So the kind of offender that we're looking at here is someone that is calling her for months, claiming that there's a relationship, building this relationship within their own deluded mind. He's making personal threats. This is not the kind of behavior that is usually shared between two people. So this offender bringing someone else in doesn't really fit. Now, it's not impossible, but it would be extremely unusual. So now you've got a problem, because this looks like one person doing something that requires movement, timing, and control across multiple locations. So one person doing all this is what it's starting to look like. And then a week after the disappearance, the phone rings at her parents' house. And when the call is picked up by Dorothy's mom, the caller says, "Is this Dorothy's mother?" And Vera, her mother, says, "Yes." The caller says, "I've got her," and hangs up. So he's confirming it and he's inserting himself into it. And then this pattern of calls to the family continues for years, from 1980 until at least April of 1984, at a frequency of almost every Wednesday afternoon, and targeting Vera primarily, calling at a time when the caller knows that Vera is going to be home without her husband, when she's alone. So he knows when she'll be there, which is creepy in its own right. Now, during these calls, he would make relatively short statements, stuff like, "I have her, I killed her." They're brief calls. He hangs up quickly. There's no storytelling. There's no explaining. This is just taunting behavior based around control. He's not trying to explain anything. He's just calling to say it. It's not communication. Like I said, this is about control. Now, they attempt to trace the calls, but this is the early 1980s. So tracing technology is just not what it is today. A caller has to be kept on a phone for an extended period of time, and this caller hangs up too quickly. And we also, on these calls, have no usable recordings, at least none that I was able to locate. So investigators can't track him, at least not with the technology that was available at that time. And then on June 12th, 1980, a call comes into the Orange County Register, which is the newspaper in that area. And the caller says, quote, "She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. I killed her." He also describes the hospital trip. He describes Conrad, the male coworker, and he describes that Dorothy was wearing a red scarf. So this becomes important, and it ties back to our earlier conversation because remember, she was wearing a black scarf to the staff meeting and only changed into the red scarf when she stopped off at home right before going to the hospital. So this is very likely the abductor that's making this call, because very, very few people would know about that red scarf, would know about that scarf change. So he knows things that were never released to the public, details that were not in the paper. And so that's what makes this call different. And at that point, this isn't just someone calling for attention. It is obviously someone that knows very important events that happened that night. And he wants them to know that. So now we have someone who has been targeting her for months, someone who knows where she was, even when she makes a change to her plans, going from the staff meeting to the hospital, which is completely random, tells me he had to have either been in the staff meeting or he had to have been following her and watching her from outside of that staff meeting, because she breaks routine. She had no plans of taking Conrad to the hospital that night. That just occurred out of the blue when she saw that he was sick. So this person, whoever it is, had to have been watching her. So we have someone targeting her, someone who knows where she is, someone who takes her, and then keeps calling, which raises a very real question. How did he know where she was that night? So that's what we're going to try to figure out as we work through this case. When you step back and you look at everything that we've laid out, this case doesn't start in that parking lot. It ends there, because by the time Dorothy Jane Scott walks out of that hospital, something has already been in motion for months. She's been receiving calls, not random calls, targeted and personal calls from someone who knows her routine, knows where she is, and makes it clear that he intends to harm her. And then that night, everything tightens. She goes from work to her parents' house to the hospital. She's not alone. She's not moving unpredictably. There's no gap inside of that building. No opportunity for someone to approach her unnoticed. And then, in a matter of minutes, she steps outside and she's gone. There's no confirmed struggle, no witness to an abduction, just a car leaving fast with someone behind the wheel that nobody can identify. And hours later, that same car is found burning miles away with an accelerant used, the driver gone, Dorothy gone. And then the calls don't stop. If anything, they become more deliberate, more controlled. A man calling her family, telling them that he has her, telling them that he killed her, and revealing details that were never made public. So what we're left with is this: a victim who was targeted, a timeline with almost no room for error, an abduction that leaves almost no trace, and an offender who inserts himself into the aftermath again and again without ever being identified. And the question that sits underneath all of it, the one that drives this entire case, is still the same. How did he know where she was that night? Because if you can answer that, you're not just solving the beginning of this case, you're solving the whole thing. This is Heavy Heart by the J.J. Hawk Band. And this is Dorothy Jane Scott. Dorothy Jane Scott was 32 years old. She was a mother first. Everything in her life, her time, her energy, her focus, centered around her son, Sean. The people that knew her best didn't describe her as loud or outgoing or someone that was chasing attention. They described her as quiet, steady, the kind of person that showed up every day without needing recognition for it. She worked, she took care of her son, she stayed close to her family, and she lived a life that was, by every account, simple and grounded. Her brother said that she exemplified one word, and that word was give. That she would give and give and give, no matter what it cost her. And when you look at the night that she disappeared, that's exactly what she was doing. She saw someone that needed help, and she stepped in. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just doing what she always did, helping someone else. She was a devoted mother, a daughter, a sister, a person who built her life around the people that she loved, and in ways that we'll never fully be able to measure. There are moments that never happened because she wasn't there. Lessons her son didn't get to learn from her. Conversations her family never got to have. A future that was taken, and not just from her, but from everyone who loved her. Dorothy Jane Scott should still be here, and she should be remembered for who she was, not just for what was done to her.
Still I'm holding with this heavy heart, with this heavy heart, with a heavy heart, I'm still alive. Through the fire, I will survive. Every scar, a story to write. With a heavy heart, I'll fight tonight. No chain can hold me, no storm can break. This heavy heart will never fade.